Okay, good it didn't crash. Um, Sometimes OBS can be weird. Um, Let me just move this window a tad.
That's
Okay.
the way it is for any kind of software that you use and depend on and rely on. It finds a way to fail on you.
It finds ways to remind you that it actually has control over you, not the other way around.
That's a good way of putting it.
Okay, anyway, hello everyone and welcome to Devs Play Screw You Bear Dad. I'm your buddy, Real Soviet Bear, aka Mirdrag, and with me is Mr. Nelson. Hello.
Hello.
So, as usual for Devs Play, you're basically one of the people who work on this game, or since it's a smaller game, you're the only person I assume who work on this game, right?
Yeah, I programmed, designed, wrote all the word thingies, but I did have a big team of, and you'll see this at the end in the credits. I did have a big team of very patient, awesome people who play tested it when I could no longer bear, excuse the pun, to look at this thing.
No, never apologize for puns in this channel. Never own them. And there will be a lot of puns in this game because I've played this before and I know where it goes. But yeah, well, before we start,
Yeah.
this is an interactive fishing game. I haven't really done any of these on stream or on camera. I played a few, like in my own time. But can you tell us a bit what is Screw You Bear Dad?
So, Screw Your Bear Dad is on the choice-based side of interactive fiction. And what's interesting about interactive fiction is that it's mainly split into two camps at the moment. There's primarily choice-based interactive fiction, like what you see in open source engines like Twine, which is why I developed Screw Your Bear Dad in. And then there's sort of this older guard of interactive fiction called parser fiction, which is where you get the old Infocom games, Zork, and etc. And those two sort of factions don't often get along, funnily enough. So it was interesting because when I started making games with Twine, it was the only tool I even could come to terms with. It was more a thing of necessity than I really want to use Twine. I want to make interactive fiction. I was never a player of interactive fiction, so I just wanted to make something using it. I made All Hail the Spider God and then this, and it was interesting that with Scree Birda in particular, this game was not only my entry into like proper game development and design. It was the first game I released where I actually felt like I knew what I was doing, for better or for worse, as we'll no doubt talk about later. But it was also the game where I saw what the interactive fiction community was like, because All Hail Spider God was made in this breathless vacuum, and then this had a lot more time to really become what the weird pun-filled thing it ultimately became. And in hindsight, if I was to develop this game now, I wouldn't have. It wouldn't have existed. So I'm glad that it does.
Yeah. So that sounds like when you say this was the first game where you felt like you knew what you were doing. I still struggle with my own game development to feel like I know what I'm doing. It's generally just fumbling and praying it actually all fits together. Um, but yeah, so
When it comes to,
yeah.
sorry,
No,
sorry.
go on, go on.
I was just gonna say, what's great about game development and creative work in general is that, like, you tend to actually do some of your best work when you're in that weird point between you're doing what you know and then you have no idea how this is going to turn out. A lot of that fear and anxiety, it's not the best feeling, but a lot of cool creative stuff comes from that
Yeah,
little space.
yeah. So let's before we continue talking, maybe we should actually try and move from this screen to just show people what Screw You Bear That is all about. And for the more perceptive people, you probably noticed that there's a line here that says "You are a bear," which suits me perfectly. And this being interactive fiction, the a bear part is highlighted so you can, as you know, as the name says, interact with it. A cool bear, a really cool bear, the coolest of bears.
I should probably explain this bear part, mainly
Yeah.
because I got off on a tangent earlier. Scree Bear Dad is a game about essentially being a bear. You're wearing a bow tie. You crash through the skylight of this enigmatic facility in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and come to terms with who you are, who you want to be, and where you fit into the grand scheme of even this strange place. And while this is happening, the second layer of the game, the second major layer of the game, is the people in the facility reacting to your choices. So I wanted to have this weird dissonance between people you didn't really control who were sort of reacting to you, and then you being what would in any other game a silly engine of destruction, having an actually very fleshed out backstory and some real pathos to your traditional sort of absurd adventures.
So, before we acknowledge Beardom, I have a question. Did you start this off with a premise of having a bear and then the puns came forth, or did you really want to do something with puns, so you put a fair bear in because that facilitates puns best?
A lot of what happened in Beardad came about as a result of my first game, All Hail the Spider God. There was a bunch. All Hail the Spider God was structured with a static beginning, middle, and end, and what changed the most was your journey through it. And the game acknowledged your choices, but I was very inspired by Planescape Torment in that the conclusion was foregone and it made sense. What mattered was who you chose to become along the way. And what killed me was as I saw people playing this game and streaming this game, not only was I stunned because, hey, people care enough to stream it, that was awesome, but they didn't play it more than once. So all of the way I structured it so that each time you play the game, you learn a bit more about the world and about the people in it, all of that was gone. And most people just came out the other end thinking, oh, that was weird. And that was it. And it killed me inside. And the other thing that really killed me was that the only thing they would choose is in All Hail the Spider God, there was a section of the game, there was a branch that said pun. Everyone chose that branch. And that ridiculous branch where the people but in the sort of place where you deliver these puns as they become increasingly murderous, that was all people saw of the setting, the sort of niche that I had in there. Yeah. So when I made Scree Bear Dad, I knew first of all I wanted to make a more linear experience, something that acknowledged your choices, made them feel meaningful, while simultaneously just telling a very strong story in and of itself, so that you didn't have to go through 2-3 times to see everything and feel like you knew what was going on. And the second big thing is I wanted puns to be an organic, inescapable part of the game. Like death and taxes, you can't escape puns. They will find you. And it's like, I hate to compare it to the Bible, but it's like you're either going to succumb to the punnage or you'll be broken by the punnage. And it's up to you which course of action you really want to take.
Yeah, if this were a BioWare game, your attitude towards puns would just be like, blue and red, like accept puns or deny them. Morality.
Well, I think we can all agree that like puns are positive morality.
Yeah.
And actually, if you look at the tiny tail, the 3 dots that are illuminated, this entire section was my way of prototyping having an organic tutorial in the opening section of the game. Because in this opening section, you learn that, okay, if something is blue, you can continue to click on it, and it will show you more things. And if there's something highlighted blue that may not even be pertinent, that doesn't continue things, it will show you secrets. And so this was my way of prototyping more organic game design within this narrative framework that was the only engine I really knew.
Yeah. Yeah, this is I haven't played too much interactive fiction. This was like, I've played the parser ones. I didn't play Twine based ones all that much, but I do know that well, I don't know what it's like for you, but I know for me at least, when there's like a limited framework you can work in, Like for example, when I worked in mobile, I did enjoy the aspect of okay, you're limited to the phone screen and any motion you can do with your finger, and that sometimes brings out creative ideas. And I think same way Twine also functions. That you being just limited by text and hyperlinks and like encoding text like brings out ideas that you wouldn't really consider if you dealt with it in like a fully featured game.
That's absolutely true. I think that restrictions breed creativity, and I'm sure someone much wiser than me has probably said the exact same thing in those exact same terms, but I believe it. For me, especially Screw You Bear Dad taught me that I think that has been successful has always the idea has been accompanied by the concept of the structure it's placed within, right? So it's not just, oh, this is a great blue sky idea. How does this come about? Because that encourages a lot of flailing. It can be a no man's land, basically, of lost possibilities and iteration where you might lose the core of what you're trying to do in the first place. For Bear Dad, the structure for the game was very clearly defined. The first layer was absurd action, the layer was introspection and reaction to your choices. And having those internal limitations really encouraged me as far as what does this game become, and as I continue to develop it, even though it's the least structured beforehand title that I've made, it really gave me a really robust framework to work within as far as, okay, how do I keep this thing on track? And what is it really, aside from just a game about bears
Yeah, this is one of the
plummeting and with fur rippling and waving?
Yeah, this is one of the things I did really enjoy with the game that plays like it doesn't just play with what's bold, italic, and hyperlink, but it actually does these kind of like tricks of um, adding more impact to the text. And it's silly to say like, oh, okay, the words are shaking, so you do feel like stuff is waving and you're falling. But when you're engrossed in reading, it does kind of add to the experience.
A lot of that was a reaction to basically my experiences playing other interactive fiction games. I'm not the target audience for interactive fiction. I tend to be very action and goal oriented. If I'm playing an experience, I like things that are to the point and that move me through at all times, and luxuriating in a setting with a lot of words and a tenuous endpoint or pacing just never really appealed to me. And there's a ton of really good works in that mold in interactive fiction. So for me, when I was developing Screw You Bear Dad and All Hail the Spider God, and now I'm working on another Twine game called Ars Shop that might come out later this year. Design, and particularly the text effects, was me saying, okay, I don't know how to make images and sound and connect it to these words. I'm still very new to game development. How do I make the very act of interacting with text, which is your only interaction in interactive fiction, how do I make that feel active and meaningful? My solution was these glowing words and text effects and string them all together. And Twine wasn't designed to do that. I had to build an entire system, and it's very convoluted, and the code is terrible. But it was so gratifying to see people's reaction to it. That people who typically wouldn't play a Twine game like me had the reaction when they decided to go through this entire hour-long silly adventure.
Yeah, I feel that I was kind of in that target audience as well because I generally just went to play this based on the name and it sounded good. So when I started playing it, I did feel like, oh, okay, I don't usually play games like this that much, but this was actually it felt like it was made for people who don't play interactive fiction as much. Like, in the way that it's kind of like direct, it's a bit direct to the point, and it has like all these shiny text bells and whistles. Like I think later when we get to it, we'll see also. I think you play also with color and text size as well, and that's stuff that me being a shallow person entertains me.
I actually didn't know how to. I so wanted to make the UI have different colors depending on where you moved. So, still, even though I didn't have art skills, I could at least make colors change, surely. But I didn't manage to do that for this game. So,
Yeah.
my next, well, and for my game immediately after this, and for my last, what might maybe my last Twine game, Arts Shop, that's my major consideration, finding ways to again expand iteratively. Say, okay, I have text effects, I have variable ways of interacting with the world. How do I now play with layout and color in a way that provides the same experience but more so?
Yeah, I think so because I don't go into this same like the interactive fiction circle, so I don't know what design trends there are. But I do know that I've read a few books that played with the written format.
Mm.
There's one book in particular, Paul Auster's Oracle Knight, which has three parallel stories going on. But the two main stories are, the events of the book told from a first-person perspective, and then you have the footnotes at the bottom of the book, where whenever the character sees something important to them, or a character important to them, the footnotes start their own story related to that thing. So he would, you'd see his
Oh.
wife for the first time, in the book, and then you'd have the entire footnote parallel story explaining how he met her. And I
So
thought
it's like House of Leaves.
it's kind of like House of Leaves, yeah. It just played with that format, and that I found very interesting because usually people don't use footnotes for that. So I do wonder where Twine games, where there are like functionalities or like formats that you can just stretch out as much as possible and just do new things with them.
Oh, I think there's a ton of design space to make interesting things in Twine frameworks or really any engine. But I think a lot of what stops that innovation is public perception of an engine. Like people see Twine as this common artsy fartsy thing. That's if a game is made in it, it's kind of basic, sort of like how some people see stuff made in the Unity engine or RPG Maker. Despite the real obstacle to a game being made in these frameworks being good, isn't the engine, it's the ideas behind it and how they use the tools they're given. So yeah, I would definitely agree. I think there's a lot of design space in interactive fiction that hasn't been plumbed yet. I'm certainly not the only one pushing it. There's a lot of dedicated people in the space who have been there for years for both Twine and Parser Fiction who are actually really pushing those boundaries. And it's a space that even if I'm not really in it, I'm sort of thankful that I ever had the chance to observe it up close because now that I just sort of follow it on the edges of my Twitter feed and etc., it's exciting. It's exciting, and it may never be commercially viable, but that's okay.
Yeah, I do generally disagree with like public perception of engines.
Mm.
It's kind of it's kind of this weird thing because I feel because games come from a tech background. You have to program games, and that was generally something that was insurmountable for a lot of people. It was just like programming wasn't that accessible, and now as you get more tools, I've seen this in the industry. Like as you get more accessible tools, people who specialize in using complicated tools to their fullest feel like their own work is becoming less valuable by other people having access to it, which is
Mm.
an attitude I understand where it's coming from, and especially when you have something that's so accessible, it tends to open up the doors for people just making whatever. Obviously the reason we do have as many games these days is because they're much easier to make. But then I don't think that's a bad thing, because if you have, 100, for every 100 games, if you have one game that's exceptional and it couldn't have been created without those kind of tools, I think that's, personally, I think that's worth it.
And you have a real point there. That divide is really very clearly seen on the player side as well, because especially when people are younger, they see these things being made, and it feels like these products are coming from some magical engine. Like looking at a game made on your NES, you can't conceive how this would ever have been built by human hands. And now suddenly we have engines that can replicate what an NES has done in fairly short order, and these things are brought into the realm of the human. So audiences are like, hey, if anyone can make a game now, even if the same people saying this aren't making anything, there's a sense of injustice in that, hey, you're hurting my experience in the games being made now because you're yet another person contributing to all of these things being made with these tools. I'm being very vague here, but the problem isn't only from the development side; it's from the audience side as well. There's definitely a large segment of people who will look at game engines and say this is a bad thing, simply because not so much. I mean, the tools are fantastic now. The tools are on the development side are easier to use for actual proper game developers from AAA on down than ever. But because they're now visible for the first time, they're much more open to criticism, and that's just a natural part of, I guess, game development. You're going to deal with that as things get more accessible.
Yeah, and I think it's a trade-off. You get more accessible tools. That means you also get more accessible or more prevalent criticism in general. So, but in my mind, it's like if more people, like if one person gets to make something amazing because these tools are accessible, and we already had so many good, game maker stuff, Unity stuff come out, it's worth it.
Absolutely.
But to go back on Baradad, so this was one of those moments where the game started off very silly. You're a bear, you're flying through the sky, the words are shaking, all that, and then all of a sudden the game kind of gets real, and that caught me really off guard. So there's the part where we're basically sitting with our bear dad, who the title is insulting, and there's this awkward, disappointed parent atmosphere in the air.
This section was really divisive for people because, as you'll see when you click on "So this is nice," you actually don't advance the dialogue here. It's Bear Dad, and you're more thinking in response to him. You have very little agency in this section. So the entire game, particularly as you go through more flashback segments, isn't only a mechanical representation of you dealing with Bear Dad and who you want to be and what your relationship is with him. It's you actually gaining agency. So by the end of the game, when you're having a interaction with Bear Dad, you control the timing. You actually flip it so that he can't respond to you, or that he actually has to react to you rather than him always being, in a way, the aggressor. And it's a really difficult journey because a lot of games, particularly when it's just text, you're just looking at this text for like 5 seconds. It feels boring. And that being the case by design, this was a thing where I had to sort of go back and say, even if this was by design, even if it did what I wanted it to do, the demands that it placed on my audience, I don't know if they were particularly worth it in hindsight.
I can understand both your perspective then and the perspective now. Definitely don't want the audience like suffering their enjoyment for you to prove a point, but also you kind of
Yeah.
want to get your point across.
Everything in game development is trade-offs and compromises and towing some sort of line of nuance, and that's why actually I love not only creative work but game development in particular, particularly because people have a that is shorter and there is a need for interaction in most cases. It forces you to really every single thing from narrative to mechanics is a balancing act, and it's something you actively have to work at if you want it to be a nuanced, interesting, cohesive product the entire way through. And I love that part of game development. I love that problem solving aspect of it.
Yeah, I think it's I sometimes like wake up in the morning and just go over what I have for work and then just think to myself, man, if I had, a routine job where I just do the same thing every day and not this where, you come into work and just realize, oh my god, now I have to figure out this thing like what just completely new and didn't have anything to do with anything else, but it also has to do everything with everything. Like doing something fresh almost every day is kind of what keeps me going, like makes me enjoy this job. Whereas if I did some routine work, which works for some people, but I know for me personally, I'd just be like bored out of my mind after a month.
The really one really cool thing I would just want to point out about Bear Dad is that originally this whole thing about this secret third layer of you dealing with your bear dad and flashing back to your bear past wasn't in the original design of the game. I was just going to have silly adventures and people react to you. And the opening wasn't you falling from the sky. It was actually, and here control is completely taken away from you and you break through the sky glass. Originally kicked off the adventure was you get to choose what type of bear you're going to be. You can be a bear, a clown bear. You can be a spy bear. You can be all these different things, and it would have affected your adventure throughout the entire experience. The type of craziness you could enact, but first of all, the combinatorial explosion was insane. And the second big thing I learned as I really began to flesh out the different types of bears you could be was that most of the bears weren't fun. I created the project originally to say, okay, I want to tell one really good story where your choices feel meaningful, even if they don't completely affect the entire course of experience, the sort of thing that you encounter in something made by Telltale or etc. And that original opening and structure did not fit those goals at all. So I actually had to rip out a giant piece of work and restructure it and focus on what was fun. And that sounds obvious, but when you're the person developing the game and you're looking at something that's a couple of weeks of work, and there's parts that are good and there's parts that are bad, it hurts a little bit to cut that content, but it's needed. And once you finally do it and you see the results in the work, the feeling of relief and satisfaction is really palpable. I'm really happy that I did end up cleaning up that initial part of the game, especially as you continue to play. You're going to see, wow, if, 1 second, you want to pause here.
Yep.
If I had gone with that original structure design where you could choose what type of bear you could be, you can choose in this game that from the beginning will affect your experience the entire way through. And designing the game to accommodate that initial radical choice was killer in and of itself. So if I had made the games I originally planned it and had not changed my plans as I saw how they function in reality, this game probably never would have been made.
Yeah, especially because if we go for 5 bear variants, that's it's not exactly 5 times the content because you'd probably have them go through similar paths, but you'd still have to make custom content for a lot of stuff.
A bunch of edge cases. What if someone chooses this and then this, which only works in this path, and then you end up basically with a game that's far beyond the scope of a couple month project being made for Interactive Fiction Competition 2016.
Yeah, that's a scope that Undertale has, where you have a million edge cases taken into account, and that's the kind of stuff that you put in as a selling point for a game because it's that hard to actually accommodate all of those things.
And that's also the game that didn't take like 5 years, 4 or 5 years.
It took a while. I know it was kickstarted, but yeah, writing and taking into account every single permutation of every single player action and combination takes a really long time to do.
Yeah, if you're doing it well, and it pays off, but there's definitely effort attached there.
Yeah, it's why usually
Show.
when games do that, they kind of do it in like segmented areas. Like, oh, you have these choices for this little quest, but that quest is its own little bubble and doesn't really affect anything else other than maybe which panels you get at the end of the game.
Which that isn't very satisfying in itself. So
Yeah.
finding again that balance was really important to me for this project. This first section, you can choose to inspect your squishy landing pad, the soft squishy object that crumpled beneath your body a second ago, or you can take moments to appreciate that you aren't dead. And this marks the first portion of the game where you can actually pursue a side ending. And this was and these side endings were very consciously designed to provide satisfying endings in and of themselves. If you click on take a moment to appreciate that you aren't dead, the game will try to push you back to just inspect the thing, do the thing. But if you continue to ignore it, there's this really neat payoff of you get this very radically weird ending. And there's a few other points you can do that throughout the game. But most players, I found after the fact, even though there's no penalty if you do the side path, actually, because of the way I structured the game, it just puts you right back to where you were before you pursued that alternate ending. But most people, they felt that the choice was so momentous that they didn't go off and get the side ending, even if it provided a satisfying conclusion in and of itself. So on one hand, I'm kind of sad that I made like 4 or 5 of these very significant, narratively satisfying conclusions, and barely anyone saw them. But it was very satisfying on another level to say, hey, fronted with these endings felt so meaningful that even if it didn't have major consequences attached to it, people were inclined or led to move away. It showed that an effect did occur here, and I was very happy about that.
One thing I found, and this is generally also from talks of other game developers, is that some players like to have a choice even if they would never take that choice because it brings more meaning to the choice that they make. So for example, I remember this from a panel of Dragon Age. In Dragon Age 2, they forced you to play human, and the reason they chose to have players be human is because the major percentage of their player base played human in the first game. But then when they did do that, they had a lot of people who never play human characters in Dragon Age Origins, like who play elves and dwarves and whatnot, complained, or not that they complained because they couldn't play their race, but people who only played humans, they also complained because they felt that the fact that they were forced to play human was less impactful than having several choices and then picking human. And I also, and you also have that again, maybe in Undertale, because that's a very choice-oriented game. For me, I didn't choose any of the evil, bad options. But it felt more meaningful to me to know that there was this other choice I could do, but I still stuck with mine. So even if there is like a lot of wasted content, quote unquote, in games where people never see it or touch it or go for it, it still kind of, by existing, brings usually some weight to the most common choices.
And this is one of the things I love most about not only game narrative, but game development in general. So much of it is based on essentially stagecraft. It's about the smokes and mirrors and how you perceive the experience more so than the experience itself. A psychological effect like, okay, this actually feels more meaningful when there are choices, even if the choices don't really matter in and of themselves. I think that's really powerful, and it's actually part of the reason I will never play a Telltale game more than once. It's because I have a really good narrative experience. I feel like my choices are meaningful, and I know if I go back through and see my choices were ignored, I'm going to come away feeling pretty crappy. But if I just go through that one route, I do end up getting this very tight, well-produced narrative experience, and I can put it away and say, I'm done. That was fun. That was good.
Yeah, I definitely agree that that's one of the main draws of Telltale games. That even if a lot of people say the same things happen, but I feel like that's because I guess that's how people have been conditioned to play games. They expect something as a reaction to happen to what they do, rather than, oh, I'm gonna choose how I handle this. When you play a like, I don't know, your standard RPG adventure game, and you usually have the kill option, stealth option, talk option, and we accept that even though we get the quest done and we get the same result, that how we play it, that's fine. Like, that makes it different. But in narrative games, people feel that if you say something, whoop, that was, I think, someone's phone.
Oh, sorry about that. My phone went off.
No, it's fine.
Okay, please continue.
But people would, when they do like narrative stuff, like in The Walking Dead, when The Walking Dead from Telltale, when you pick something and say something, it's kind of like, oh, I get the same result as if I had said something different, but I know my character reacted differently. Like, he was more violent or nicer or whatever. But for some reason, like, people in general aren't okay with that yet. Like, I guess it's because it's not been explored enough or available enough.
It's something that has an approach it, but each direction, whatever its flaws or its highlights, I think is kind of valid. Every time we have a game developed that approaches these issues, whether it succeeds or fails, we learn a little bit more about how to best utilize our medium, and I love that.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I always find flawed games more interesting than a perfect, quote unquote, perfect game, if there is such a thing.
And this is the big signposting for whether or not you look at the squishy thing, for goodness sake, or how cool it is not to be dead. I deliberated on which order to put these, which one to stack on the top and which one to stack on the bottom, forever, for like a solid hour, actually, in between developing other things. Because, again, going back to stagecraft, how these things were ordered is so important throughout the entire field. Ignoring the game's desire to get you back to looking at the squishy thing and continue main narrative. That's always placed on the bottom. Place it on the bottom for this, someone is just clicking on the bottom again for like the 10th time to get a certain ending.
Yeah.
If I stack it on the top, though, and the choices are still in the same size, someone cannot be paying attention, just click on the bottom thing, and end up losing out on their opportunity to change the course of the experience. Um, I made the choices huge, and I changed the order so you had to consciously think about what you wanted to do here.
Yeah, and it's also because you like the top option previously meant you went back and reset, whereas here it's like no, the top option doesn't reset you back. So that's also reasoning, not just like for passive clicking, but also how like a player might perceive it. Like, oh, is the top option now I go back and the bottom option I continue? You know. So there is a lot of nuance there, as you say.
There's a ton of like when you saw the three dots earlier in the bear dad flashback. Uh, Tweaking the timing for that took like half an hour for a 7-second joke, but so many people ended up busting out laughing at the extended timing of that third dot. Me tweaking what appeared when, that every single one of these little touches, I don't think that they're wasted time at all.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you recommend I choose? I saved the game, so.
Think about how cool it is not to be dead for the rest of eternity. Do this side ending. Let's do it. And they haven't been clued in that it's a actual human body they fell on. Seeing that warm red liquid is spilling out of them is a pretty good indication that you've done something horrible. But you're just chilling out in spite of it, and I love that's sort of the core of Bear Dad's comedy, that you have sort of this puns and this absurd humor and this darkness coexisting. And I just love writing those types of situations and characters, because I think that's how life is. You have light and you have darkness, and those contrasts are where the interesting thing happens. Interesting things happen.
I do like this running theme of explaining what kind of bear is in question.
I always thought that somebody would leave it on like the coolest of bears or whatever, but everybody clicked through it, and the fact that it became a running motif of almost like it took on a storybook like quality that wasn't intended, but I was very much happy to take credit for in the end. Oh, if you go back, crap.
Oh, we can click real quickly. It's fine.
No, you didn't make a mistake. I was just going to say real quick that at this ending, originally, if you received a side ending, because I intended for each one to be narratively satisfying in and of itself, that just ended your adventure right there. It was like, do you remember how Valve was talking about how they were designing Portal 2, and they said that there would be a bunch of different endings and a bunch of different songs for the endings?
Mm-hmm.
That's what this was originally intended to be. And I ended up putting that little go back thing as a concession to accessibility, saying, hey, before I had a save game option, because the original version didn't have it, if you ever want to go back, you now have the option too, so that you can continue the main thread. But again, a lot of people didn't end up using it because the very fact that they could end up being in a situation where the game ended felt very scary and momentous. So
what happens if we click Fin? Actually, let's try it. Oh, we get the credits.
it just straight up ends. And if you were to have clicked go back, it would have gone back. But I can imagine that, especially as you get further in, oh gosh, 45 minutes, an hour.
No, it's fine. It's fine. This is usually how these things go. You should have seen me just staring at props and Alien Isolation for, dozens of, for hours or minutes or whatever. Just like, oh, look at how this wobbly bird is cool. It looks like a real thing. And then the alien eats you.
That's the way. That's how I played Alien Isolation. So that's good to hear.
Yeah.
But Actually, I was just going to say real quick that I was talking about when people have played the game for like an hour or 45 minutes, the game near the end, the idea that your experience could end, and if you want to do something else or continue the main narrative, that you end up it's to an hour of progress. That's really, it's not the greatest feeling. So it's something that I've consciously avoided in future projects. I like to respect people's time, especially since I don't have much of it. So not having a save load feature, for example, for a game this long was a mistake.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see that. I think the convenience, accessibility versus artistic vision thing is a very case by case basis, and I think in general, unless it is like absolutely vital to your vision and the game falls apart without it, you should try and make the game as enjoyable to play for people as possible.
Yeah, for as many types of people as possible.
Exactly.
Like, have you played Nier Automata yet?
Yes, I have played through it.
I'm still working towards the game's first ending, and I love it, but because that first battle you have, this isn't a spoiler, but going through that first section of the game, if you die at any point, the game just immediately ends, and
Yeah.
it treats that as a separate ending. And I know people who have encountered that and said, okay, this just straight up wasted my time, and have not played through the rest of what is otherwise an amazing game. So on one hand, that's kind of sad that they won't get the chance to experience Nier Automata, but I feel this petty pleasure that a big AAA game sort of made a similar choice that I did for similar reasons, and I wasn't completely off base.
Yeah, definitely. Nier Automata does a lot of things that conventional design wisdom would never let you, and I think that's perfectly great. But that game is a niche, and that generally, I guess in like larger AAA games, when you're not filling a particular niche, you kind of don't want players feeling like they're wasting their time because time is a luxury these days. Maybe at some point we'll go around full circle and we can justify 100-hour RPG. We'll see.
Hmm. And that's a part of the reason I do like making shorter games, and I'm hopeful that a larger market emerges for them. I love this.
I love this option. Look around casually.
Uh, the one reason I really hope that a larger market emerges for shorter games is that I feel that there's so much fun within a shorter format that isn't possible if you're stretching something out to a longer experience. And making something that gets to the point, gives you an enjoyable experience, and then boots you back out. I love playing games like that. So getting the chance to make more games like that and seeing that people are willing to buy games like that, it's something very encouraging. It's something I want to see more of, and it's a trend I look forward to hopefully growing.
So I have one question. All of these options so far have been in all caps. Are they in all caps for the sake of readability, or is it because the bear you're playing as is overly dramatic and internally yelling his options?
I really like that explanation, so I want to steal it for the future.
Because this is the weird thing when I play this. I love that all the options were in all caps because sometimes when I'm chatting with people, I just like yell in all caps random things I just want to emphasize, even though I wouldn't actually yell them in normal conversation, but it just makes it sound overly dramatic. So with this, I saw it in this game. I was like, oh yeah, I'm guessing it's all caps because our character is like just yelling a conclusion, like come to a conclusion. The bear is just like determined to find.
Look at
what
the
the truth
squishy
is.
thing, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
I love that explanation, but In all actuality, I was actually trying to echo the old school command line interface. For All Hail the Spider God, and for some other Twine games as well, I had seen the criticism that if things are just hyperlinked, when you click on a blue object, you never know if it's going to bring you to a new page, or if it's going to advance the storyline, or if it's going to bring you back to a previous branch. There's a lot of confusion possible there, which makes, particularly for new players of interactive fiction, it makes engaging in like a hypertext game, which is what type of fiction Twine allows you to make. It makes it very difficult. So, and potentially, again, wasteful of time, confusing, off-putting, and then, since your primary worry for games, particularly with so many out there, is not so much do you get someone to play, but can you keep them playing? You do not want someone thinking, man, why am I going through this?
Yeah.
Man, this is poorly designed, or etc. So for Bear Dad, taking that feedback from All Hail the Spider God, I basically said, okay, the command line interface from Parsha Fiction is a really good, clear way of explaining, okay, we're moving on now. So I stole it, I stuck it in there, and I've continued to use it in my future projects, and it works pretty darn great. And the all caps is because of that old school DOS interface. The fact that it happens to help readability and it's all in character, that's all just more of a side benefit.
Oh, nice. So we're just gonna go Commando for this one, I feel.
This was another one of the mistakes I felt I made during the development of Scree Bear Dad. There are only 3 people!
I wonder why. I know that we're now in the timeline where we figured out what we did. In the other timeline, we wouldn't have. So tell me more.
Yeah.
See, this is why I assumed that all caps was that our bear was always excited, because this is in all caps and it's excited.
The thing is, I had in the Twine engine, those things are supposed to like boom into existence. They're supposed to pulse and like jump in like an overexcited announcer. But that effect doesn't actually display in the browser. All that displays is the caps. So your overexcited announcer has been nerfed by the browser, unfortunately.
Oh, that's a shame.
Earlier, I was saying that there was a big mistake for Screw Bear Dad. That's that the choices go undercover and go commando are confusing. If you go undercover, you take off the face of this dude and you stick it on your own, which is super macabre, but it makes for some really funny interactions later on, which were super hard to get in alongside the normal you didn't tear off his face interactions.
I can imagine being awkward to, try to reason with people with someone's face on your face.
That's why I had his face fall off before you came up. Otherwise, them coming to terms with you and you becoming friends, that wouldn't even be realistic, man.
Yeah.
So having that choice be either go undercover or go commando, the fact you don't know which one is which. Go undercover, okay, that could mean that you take the person's face, and I did a little bit of signposting for it in the section right before it, but go commando, what does that mean? It gives the impression that these are sort of useless choices that don't really mean anything. And later on you feel shocked because it's like, oh man, I took his face. But the fact that those choices weren't signposted so that you knew what you were doing, even if it was a terrible thing, I think that was a mistake. And if I was to have developed the game now, I would definitely take a little bit more time finding an ideal solution for that general issue.
Yeah, definitely. I'm assuming if you had
Bailey is based off a real person.
I assume if you had a color option, you would probably make this red or glowing red.
I would have made the entire background red for the lockdown. Yeah.
Oh, that's actually even better than what I thought. See, this is why you make interactive fiction games and I don't.
Again, it was creativity from limitations. All I knew how to do was twine, so I was just trying to stretch it as far as I could go. Twine game that has colors and layout stuff. It's gonna be released free, and I'm working in more traditional frameworks now, where I can actually have more tools, and the freedom is palpable. But I do kind of miss taking something like twine and just sort of bending it until it breaks.
Yeah. Oh, okay, this is interesting. So this is like you're trying to create how you're characterizing them.
So
I'd say
Bailey asks Carla what's going on, or she explains what's going on without prompting.
I'd say Carla is a person who doesn't wait for Bailey.
Carla is one of my favorite characters that I've ever written. And I was actually
Go on.
Oh, you're saying?
No, go on once.
I was just gonna say real quick. I originally wasn't going to make her. I had never written for a character or someone who was a woman in particular, a female protagonist. So having not only a character who was a woman, but that she played such a central role into the narrative, I was very worried about characterizing her correctly and basically making her as nuanced of a character as I would make any dude who was a dude. So I'm really happy with how she turned out and that people liked her so much. Like, she's staring people down and they made Carla a badass, and I'm so happy.
Yeah, I can relate to that. When I was doing my own writing, I also had a major female character, and one of the feedback I kept asking for was from like other like female test readers was, okay, does this like sound like an actual person, or does it sound like what a guy perceives a person to be, that kind of style? Because again, I never did it on such a scale, so you want to do stuff like that right, obviously. So I can kind of relate to that concern. But I do like Carla. I remember her being. Generally, this is why kind of like I like her, because she is the straight person in a very unreasonable situation. And those people are always entertaining to me.
A lot of comedy depends on having a good straight person to bounce off of. So Carla, I don't think the game would have worked as well if Carla hadn't been an effective straight man, as it were.
Yeah. Well, generally there's this, as we'll see if we get further in the game. I recall, like, the bear's point of view of what's going on with the other characters. Like, the characters seem like silly and aren't really clear on what they're doing, and then the characters who see the bear are also just like, oh, it's a freaking bear, what do we do? It's a massive bear that just landed someone and smashed them. So I did like those two point of views, and then you have the flashbacks where you have Bear Dad and Bear who are also in this regular environment of they might as well be people. So it was those weird like three perspectives where it all seemed absurd when you looked at all the other points of view, but when you were playing as the point of view, it seemed fairly reasonable.
Yeah, a lot of my work depends on multiple perspectives just because they interest me. I think understanding people and empathy is just so important. So making games where you do see that something is absurd or simple, but the instant you get a little bit more insight into it, you realize that it's not. Not only do I feel that's important as a philosophy for life, but as a narrative technique, it works
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. And definitely, if you feel strongly about a theme, um, you should like, especially in writing, yeah, you should definitely always explore it because with time, other themes will captivate you, and then you will probably focus on those themes as you move on. So yeah, I think it was like generally from what I like remember playing this when it released, I generally did enjoy the various points of view and how they were done, and you do make you do try to make a clear distinction of when the perspective is shifting, just so people don't get confused. Because I'm guessing without them, it would be very easy to just not know when you're all of a sudden in another point of view and just kind of takes you out of the action.
Well, gaming is usually who you are is usually expressed through the simple moniker of you.
Yeah.
And when you are like three different people, or the same person in like another timeline, and then another person looking at the people from both timelines, it can get super confusing. So there's definitely a lot of there's always a how should I put this? There's always a desire to want to have some nuance and mystery in your work, but if you can focus on putting that into the work itself instead of having a barrier to people who are just trying to understand what you're doing, making it through intelligent narrative rather than being vague for the sake of being vague. That's ideal.
Yeah. Also, I didn't catch it. Was that barrier a barrier pun or not?
You're so much better at this than me.
I I don't feel pride in that. I'm actually very ashamed. It's terrible. You know, you see
Oh,
people talking and then you just like see it's kind of like when Neo saw the Matrix, you know, people post tweets and I just see pun potential and just wait, should I just keep it to myself or get blocked by someone?
it's just you see a tweet that's just ripe for punnage in a
Yeah.
single tier. These were really fun to make.
Yeah, I was a,
Finding which word letters to capitalize when you're just destroying a scene was super fun.
I also like the slight shadow effect on the letters.
These are all built-in Twine macros.
Yeah.
It was just a lot of their ultimate effects depended on how I used them. So
Yeah.
if you look at my code, it is, but and it ends up looking like this and having the intended effect. So the terribleness of the code or the coder doesn't end up mattering.
Yeah. Yeah, don't ever worry about like the only time you should worry about messy code is if you want to consistently maintain the game or you're working with several people, then you could be like, yeah, sure, I'll pay attention. But if you can keep track of it and you're only working on it and it works, just be fine with it. Like that's what I've at least learned from what little coding I've done.
Yeah, once you start working with other people and you actually have set standards for an entire team, it's also easier to work within a framework and have good code. Otherwise, you're just on your own. You got to make the thing. Just go ahead and got to do it. You do it.
I really like this section. Just breaking everything.
There's a chance for you to break everything later on in the game, and I had to consciously design for the end of the game. Notice marking when you broke everything, how you broke everything, and making sure the two didn't conflict.
Yeah. And you know, you this is like fairly linear, as you said, because you want it to be fairly more linear than your previous game, and yet even with that, you still have like just those two decisions already add more to your workload. even if the same things happen, they need to be conveyed differently.
Yeah, my focus on Bear Dad was not so much linearity, but reactivity.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
this may not change the course of the entire adventure, but everything you choose to do
yeah,
makes a difference.
yeah. In that sense, I mean, um, tiny planets.
Ooh, points at a tiny point on the screen. I should have used alternate wording.
Yeah. Well. Um. Yeah. This is how I think everybody feels when they look at their games being played. Like, oh, I should have done something else here.
Well, I love pointing these out because stream started. Bear Dad was sort of a huge step as far as my growth as a creator. Yes, pun.
That one's pretty good.
So, getting to the point where I can look back at my work and say, "Oh, I could have structured this like this," and seeing your old work and see places where you can not only improve but how you can improve, then that's a pretty darn good sign that you're growing. And
Yeah.
growth is always the goal. This is the thing for these sections. Even if you aren't you aren't you're only changing the characters' approach to each other on just a basic level, and doing little side conversations. It was basically intended that you could rush through these sort of sections if you want, get back to the bear, or you could really get into the heads of the people occupying this side of the facility. And that was just my way of providing choice within, again, a framework that is more linear, that was more focused on this single story.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and I do like the messaging of it. Like previously, it was clear by how the options were phrased. Okay, this is gonna give you more info, more backstory, or this is just continue with the main thread. And I do like generally that kind of stuff. Just being able to like look at something, analyze something without feeling like you're in a rush. Because even with those small choices, like being able to examine an item even though you might not want to, it still feels like, oh, I chose to examine this item or I chose to ask this question. It still feels like you're more involved in what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people give Bioware flack for the NPCs basically having a little branch where it's just like, ask them about everything. And you just go through every single one of those questions. But as a player, I love those because it does feel like a conversation where I am trying to find out things and I'm just asking question after question after question. Um, if even if it's not quote unquote realistic design, games aren't about being realistic. They're about being fun, about getting a vision across. And if your vision is this big, wonderful world that can't just be summed up in a couple sentences, but requires a lot of viewpoints, and there's a lot of people in it to learn about, and a lot of perspectives of this world to learn about, then heck yeah, give me as many avenues to learn about as possible, and let me choose which ones I pursue.
Yeah.
For example,
The one, I'm just admiring the punnage.
the bear of bad news. A good example for me is in Skyrim. I will, whether it's Skyrim or Oblivion or Morrowind, I will ask all of the questions. I will go down every single conversation branch that I can. I'm basically going to pursue as many outward narrative options as possible and try some special choice branches as well. But read a lore book. If you give me a lore book, I'm going to sell it. First of all, I'm going to open it up to see if there's a stat bonus associated with it, and then I'm going to sell it as quickly as possible. I do not want to read your in-game book talking about your in-game things. And you know what? If that was the only source of lore in Elder Scrolls, on the other hand, if only these conversations and these outward narrative options were available, I think it would also be worse for it as well. You got to have a little bit of both, even if there's people who are only going to choose one.
Yeah, yeah. I also almost never read books in the Elder Scrolls. I read them when the title is very interesting.
The lusty Argonian maid.
Yeah, and there were also, oh god, there were a few more. Like there was one book that taught you how to do stealth in Morrowind. And my question was, okay, how does a book actually teach me how to get stealth? So I read the story because up until then I had no context. It was just magic book, give a skill. And then it was like, oh, it was actually a massive story about how one guy was left for dead and then double crossed his former partner and stole his stuff from him. And like, oh, you
It
learn how to
is
sneak.
super interesting reading books like that. And I've actually heard the refrain that I wish I could actually play these situations because the books write about more interesting situations than quests,
Yeah.
despite Elder Scrolls having quite a few amazing quests. So that's another reason I like multiple perspectives and anthologies, especially. God, I wish there were more video game anthologies. That is such unplumbed territory. I'd love to see more games made with that sort of mindset. Not just, okay, you follow this single character to the end and have interesting adventures, but no, you shift perspective to the most interesting perspective throughout the adventure. Main character be damned.
Yeah, that isn't done too much lately. There are a lot of old games that do that in interesting ways. Like I remember Breath of Fire 4 was really interesting in that regard, where you shifted between the main character and the main villain at random points in the game. And it added quite a lot. But yeah, that's definitely not done enough these days because, games are more expensive, ergo making more characters is more expensive.
There's ways to do it. There's if there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah, of course.
We just got the What Remains of Edith Finch, and from what I've heard, that's an anthology style story.
Oh, I need to check that
Um,
out. People have been saying it's really good.
yeah, if you can always design to minimize basically the costs of your wild ambition, it just requires again designing for it and I guess wanting that sort of experience.
Oh, this is sure is a screen to start with. Drugs.
When you have the anthology, there's going to be things in the anthology that people aren't going to like. There's going to be sections or like episodes of the Twilight Zone that people aren't into. And that's just something you kind of have to come to terms with as a creator as well. Not everybody's going to like every bit of whatever you make.
Of course.
Fun fact, being highlighted red was the idea of my little sister. She walked in as I was developing this section and she said, "You should highlight the drugs in red." And I was like the drugs in red. So my little sister, if anyone ever asks you who's responsible for drugs, reply that it's my little sister. And I will back up your claims.
I will make a note of that. I do like that the tranquilizers are purple as well. Hell yeah, drugs.
I'm not saying everyone who clicks "hell yeah drugs" is put onto a watch list, but I'm not saying that either.
Don't worry. My puns have already put me on all national watch lists for butchering the English language.
Finding a way to justify gallons of hallucinogenic tranquilizers being stored beneath the workplace was an interesting challenge.
It's even if you hadn't explained it, I would have just like shrugged it off. Yeah, sure, we have hallucinogenic tranquilizers. It's kind of like, oh, I'm fine with a bear smashing through a roof and having parental issues, but gallons of tranquilizers in the basement, that's where I draw the line. But I feel it's even more ridiculous that there is an explanation for it.
I think without those again those contrasts of realism and groundedness in between the absurdity, it wouldn't work as well. And again, looking at it now, I think it's been since I touched it. Uh, it's really cool being able to enjoy looking at my game again, being able to enjoy its jokes. Like I forgot most of this. One thing I forgot was how difficult Jonathan was to write, because originally he was about to get axed. Carla had a defined personality. Bailey had a defined personality. Bailey's laid back. Carla is taking charge. She's basically the main character of these sections. And Jonathan is sort of the wild card, and making a good wild card that was nerdy and rules obsessed and interesting, sympathetic, despite having a lot of traits that could otherwise be annoying or off-putting or straight up just like
So this entire thread is amazing. I like this. You knew before you were hired. Like I think that's a very nice character trait of Jonathan. Now that we are discussing him.
Yeah, finding a way to give Jonathan an interesting character. Carla says, "And you agreed to this? Why?" And he's silent, and then he says, "I like the ocean," and that sums up his character so dang nice. It took a while to get him to that point, but I ended up really liking him, despite his having to necessarily be axed. Process. I think the game would be less for him. I think he was a necessary character. He was just difficult to write because he did have to fill so many roles at once. He could be a straight man, he could be a wild card, he could be an instigator of insanity and grounded all at once, depending on the situation. And versatile characters like that are way harder to write than your typical here's the strong one, and here's the funny one, and here's the one that is apathetic.
Yeah.
The more nuanced you make your characters, the harder it is, but the more worth it is.
Yeah, and when writing wild cards, there's always the risk of making them feel less like wild cards and more like whatever you need them to be at a given moment.
The moment when the player or the reader or what have you breaks through the fiction, says, "Okay, you're going too far now," that's when things get bad, and that's when you get the chance of losing them. They use an ice cream party to install this. It's diabolical. Diabarical.
Stone cold pun. I have heard this response many times in my life. Bailey is my spirit animal from this group. Definitely, most I can relate to.
It was really cool. He's based off of at Nintendo Legend on Twitter, Eric Bailey. He routinely whips his Twitter following into a frenzy with puns and polls and all sorts of ridiculousness. Just launched a Patreon too. And yeah, he's a cool guy. I was thinking, okay, for All Hail the Spider God, I was thinking, okay, Bailey is really into spiders. And he has the largest Twitter following. I wonder if he would really enjoy as the Spider Prophet. And turned out he was up for it, and he let me make spiders pop out of his orifices, and it was great. So I brought him back for this game too, and he was once again cool enough to let me sort of have carte blanche and making Bailey not only a cameo, but into a full character in his own right. And that sort of humility is really appreciated. Again, I think we could have had a character who was Bailey, but if he wasn't based off of the real Bailey, the game would have been lesser for it.
So was this dynamic? Like, is this considered like is this phrase here, for example, because I wrecked the entire cafeteria and would have been different if I had investigated instead? If you can recall that.
Oh yeah, I did, and but I don't think my microphone picked it up.
Okay.
This is one of the sections where this is you're being entered back into your section of the world, and whenever the perspective shifts, I try to use the phrase "you are a bear" or some sort of overt introduction to bring you back into the action on either side of the perspective line. And you can keep sleeping. And if you do, you miss out on one of my favorite sections of the game.
Well, we can load that back up. And we can try to open our eyes.
When you try to open your eyes, you realize that you're surrounded by tranquilizer gas. I got to use the word burbles here, and I was so happy.
Burbles down the walls. I
should have said barrels.
Yeah, you probably should have. Then again, does like the narrative voice make puns, or is it only like character voices that make puns?
I think I'm willing to break my own rules when it comes to fitting in a pun.
Okay. I can respect that.
Matter.
Attack the mist, talk to the mist, succumb to the mist, escape the room. Oh man, so many choices. Talk to the mist.
Each one of these was super fun to write. The Talk to the Mist was, I think, out of the 4, my favorite. Clearly, attempting to speak to the wave of hallucinogens surrounding you is your best option. You. Voice the gas?
I can't believe the gas punned me.
So I'm going to say, hey,
wow, I can't believe our character's being so owned by tranquilizer gas.
And the character says, what? And it's like, hey, there's an informal greeting for horses and those who wish to sound like an ass. And yes, I did mean for that statement to be a double entendre. Do you know what a double entendre is? I know, yes. Speaking correctly is very important, you know. It's a skill mastered only by a chosen few who must spread their enlightenment through fervent judgment on internet messaging systems.
I love this realization.
I already breathed you in.
Yeah, like I'm actually already drugged up, aren't I? Oops. I like that.
Actually, this is another point of me finding the fun in a section, and you can save here.
Okay.
Me finding the fun in a section and deciding to basically fold up to segue into it, if that was what was fun. If you talk to the mist, you would find yourself on the comedy club stage and going through this hallucinogenic sequence while you're still like half awake. Then I realized that it was so fun and I put so much time into it that, man, this would actually, it's already a hallucinogenic sequence and you're already breathing it in. It would be super fun if you chose to open your eyes, you always came to this. And so, in a way, that not only extended the game time for each person who chose the thing, so they would always get this, what previously used to be an optional section. But also, it was just what worked best for the game. Sometimes you get these happy coincidences where you find.
I'm sorry.
You find that the options you made, you can end up actually connecting them to each other and building a long string of options that end up providing other and more fun together than they ever could have apart. And all of these questions, finding what would a terrible comedian say, what would I say if I was on a comedy club stage out of nowhere, and reasonable reactions to it, and then writing the reaction of the crowd to your terror was absolutely such a fun time, so brilliant.
Yeah, I was just like reading this, and I was so focused on the sports one that I just didn't visualize just throw up. Like that's your reaction to social anxiety. Just throw up in front of all these
It took a
people.
lot.
I'm just
Actually, the line "fascist bastards" because of the way it's coded in Twine, I couldn't put it in double quotes, so it took a lot of tweaking to get it in even the single quote form. But the throw up form took a lot of work too. But even if it's just one line, it was worth it.
Let's call the audience fascist bastards. That sounds like something I do. The joke bombs. Aw.
The joke is in quotes because you called them fascist bastards. It's not much of a joke. It's unbearable. And if you click on bearable, it says not a pun this time.
Oh man. Oh no.
I give it a moment to strike that the ground actually does end up caving beneath you. Sure, this hole, you're in the center of the earth. You're a bear. You're a giraffe. I am Bearaf. That was a bit of a challenge, but I really do. I really enjoyed finding ways to make this crazy thing that shouldn't have worked work.
Oh no, another flashback. Time for more real moments with Bear Dad. Oh no, actually no, we're still back here.
Yep, you gotta flip between those perspectives.
Bailey's frantically checking his Twitter notification for interfering.
That feels like something I would do. So that's why he's doing it.
I do like that Bailey uses Twitter apparently exclusively on his desktop and not on his phone. That says a lot about a person.
I didn't use. Okay, to my shame, this is the default Twitter client, and I didn't use it on my phone until April of this year. Very much reflects my own fuddy-duddy refusal to change.
I'm guessing it's actually now far worse that you have it accessible all the time rather than just on the PC.
There were times when I could escape it, and now I don't. I am compelled to check it every 5 seconds because I can.
Yeah.
This is the emotional moment between Carla and Jonathan. Where she's sort of thinking logically, and Jonathan was worried about taking out the bear, and they both have a point to it, but seeing that they care about each other is what...
Oh, she's crying. I mean, I don't blame her considering she's surrounded by these two.
Yeah, seeing that she sincerely cares for these people, I think it's very much a trend that if you're going to have strong female character, then she's this tough aliens-esque badass, and like she can't be emotional and have depth, and sometimes even make bad decisions. And I think having that fullness of character is essential.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And communicating that Carla had actually when she comes in to save the guys, already seeing Clark's death in real time. that was a bit difficult. But like when it lands, it's like, oh, holy crap. She's been through some stuff today.
Bailey speaks up. I did mention, but I really like just the contrast of serious moments and absurdity, because I feel like a lot of like absurdist humor is very difficult to do because people sometimes just go full force on it, and I feel like you really need grounded moments in it to just emphasize when the absurdity happens. So I'm kind of glad it plays out that way in this game.
Yeah, it's my favorite thing to do. Everything I do, like especially I'm writing a novel right now called Tell Virgo, and it starts off really dark, and it has moments of light and darkness after it, and light and darkness mixed together. And gosh, just whenever I get the chance to write something like that,
Yeah.
my brain just lights on fire because it's so freaking exciting to toe that line and to do it well. And I don't always do it well, but pretty darn glad that most of the time I managed to hit the mark. I say here that there's a dazzling array of mismatched sprinklers, partly to emphasize that this place, despite being otherwise a gleaming manufacturing facility, has a little bit of hints of a ramshackle construction to it. It's kind of made by someone not quite thinking clearly, not quite in our reality as seen by the hallucinogenic tranquilizers alone. And if you do eventually, if anyone playing this ends up, or anyone watching this ends up playing Screw Bear Dad, and you end up finding who built this facility and why, all the eccentricities around the place suddenly come into stark realization, like, oh, that's why it happened.
Yeah, I bet it was the guy who built the Spencer Mansion in Resident Evil. That's the only explanation I have. Just having weird traps everywhere.
To my shame, I've not played the original Resident Evil yet, and it's something I feel like I need to do, but I'm terrified to do it because I played the first, and I walked up a staircase and I stabbed a zombie in the head, and it wouldn't die. It just kept coming, and I was so unprepared for that that I immediately exited the game and turned it off and uninstalled it. Hit a zombie in the head, it should die. You don't shoot it multiple times in the head for it to not die. If I stab you in the face as a zombie, you should have the decency to fall down.
Yeah, to be fair, Resident Evil can be overwhelming. I quit 2 several times until I had the courage to actually beat the first 2 screens of the game. So, yeah.
Your example.
Yeah. Anyway, now we are a bear child. Oh god, I remember this. This is so damn terrifying. I mean, terrifying in the sense of that parental guilt tripping.
That was actually the original version of Bear Dad, who gives you the parental guilt tripping that you'll see later on. It was very different. He was very sweary. He was straight up crazy, and people immediately detached from that version of Bear Dad and the version that you see in the beginning of the game. He no longer was really a character. He did go beyond the pale, but when I grounded his tirade and his guilt and sort of the danger, sort of sick sense of love, he actually does care about you, but the way he expresses it is kind of unhealthy. Suddenly it brought a lot of the, and you ended up not feeling completely towards Bear Dad, and not complete. You didn't like the dude either. He felt dangerous. He felt off-putting, but you felt for him nonetheless.
Yeah, and in this like current iteration, or rather the final iteration you have, um, he reminds me the most, I think, of the King of the Cosmos in Katamari Damacy. Just that,
Mm.
but not the one when he's in a happy mood. The one when you game over and he just lays it on you in a very non-loud way, and you just feel like, I feel like garbage. I feel like I feel like I'm a failure in life, basically.
Oh yeah, I've been playing some of the original Katamari Damacy, and I think I lost one stage, and I made sure to never lose another because that feeling is terrible.
It's yeah, it's pretty bad.
The fact that, first of all, as a bear child, you admire Bear Dad. He's this put together figure. He's charismatic, and then later on, when he does hit you with that anger, the fact that that anger is rooted in love, it makes your feelings confused about it, much as Bear Child's feelings are confused towards Bear Dad themselves. So I liked that this section ended up putting you narratively in the same emotional state as Bear Child was, hopefully, towards their father. And this is based, this section here where you're being led away from the picnic by this group of older kids to get into some mischief. The little details I put into here about the church women being very cliquey around the refreshment tables, and around this older child Dexter having a very tenuous link of power over his followers, and then later. You're going to see a section. I'm not going to spoil it, but
yeah, I think you cut off there for a moment.
no, I was just saying later. I'm not going to spoil it, but
Okay.
you're going to get to the point where you find the mythical thing that Dexter is leading you to, and the conclusion of that section and the choice you make leading up to it, showing sort of Bearchild's just physical state of being. I really it really felt powerful to me coming back and reading it later. So I was super excited to see how that actually ended up turning out. You can identify with wanting to follow around with the cool kids, and if you screw those jerks, I'm leaving. That leads you to the other alternate ending. The game's sequence of events doesn't end up happening because this is a pivotal part in Bear Person's life.
Wow. Well, let's go and see the alternate ending then, because I don't think I've seen it. Oh no, Snake, you've started a time. Yeah, it's like Snake, you've created a time paradox.
Oh gosh, this was before I knew a lot about Metal Gear Solid. So if I was to do a Bear Dad remastered, that name, Bear Dad remastered, have an alternate paradox, a Snake-esque screen here. Bearstery.
You probably won't change your major 4 times.
This will change you. You subtly bigger than the rest of the things. Awake. 'Twas all a dream. I loved the contrast of the tiny bang and the statement that was loud. Happened to get a hold of a firecracker, and that just happened to get the idea set off beneath the infamous refreshment table. Several Bear Dads are being interrogated about the matter. Seems Dexter was wrong. There was a lot that could be missed even here. Tiny details. Living. You rise to join the commotion. A final thought from the weird dream you were even now forgetting strikes your brain.
Nice. So
And
the reason he changed his major 4 times is because of all these traumatic events. Possibly.
not it's not entirely attributed to that, but there's a definite point. What's the word for it? There's a definite case to be made that a lot of what happened this day changed you on a fundamental level.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to do a side ending to, because it still gets that like it reinforces that point that like this was important to the development of Bear. I'm just gonna call him Bear because I don't know what his full name is.
Um, Originally, it was going to be Bear Son, and then I wanted to make the protagonist gender neutral, so it was Bear Child. Bear works as well as anything else. I was never able to come with a convincing name other than just Bear. I'll show them. God, kids are impatient. I just imagine him having the most broy, annoying voice ever.
I mean,
do you hear that roar?
I mean, his nickname is Dex, so yeah, he probably sounds like that. I'm Dexter, but they call me the Dex.
What's Dex' favorite game?
Dex on Steam. I mean, there's literally a game called Dex, I think.
I was gonna say Magic the Gathering, but that works too.
Both. Yours works on a funny level. Mine works on oh, actually, there is that thing level.
I think I've even played it. Dex.
You could always
I was
go.
not paid by Dex, but if call me.
You could always say like, oh, why does Dexter always play a ranger in Dungeons and Dragons? Because Dex is his highest score.
Oh, nice.
I'm terrible. I do really like the text effects, the shaking stuff, especially because it's not overused. Like I know you said earlier that like the letter shading was a default effect of Twine, like built in rather. But the game does a good job of not overusing any of those effects, so when they do happen, they stand out always.
I like, and this is something I'm experimenting with even for my little novel Till Virgo, or novella. The very act of reading, I wanted it to feel like it was being narrated to you. That's why you have to click on each individual thing. It wasn't just to make it feel active. It felt like you were actually being told a story rather than simply reading it and interpreting it for yourself in real time. So when you get something like the intricate shifting patterns of mist, yeah, it was filling in the spaces that I could not fill in technically or with visuals or sound as I would be able to in another engine. You don't know it now, but you'll compare everything you see to this moment for the rest of your life. Because it reminded me a lot of, you see how people react to like games now, people who grew up in the SNES or NES era, and you see that thing as a kid and the way it grabs your imagination. You kind of chase that feeling, but it quite gets there. And that desire to regain something that never truly existed except in your head and in your imagination. You don't even notice Dexter taking the credit for your discovery of a series of bear children racing past you to dive into the water. Okay, Dexter screams, already claiming the loftiest perch available by proxy, again showing he's a D-bag. He says, "Go wild." And the thing about every single one of these sections, and it's cool that you saved these options, especially trying to swim with the others, shows that Bearchild is fundamentally lonely. And you end up sinking into the water no matter which of these you end up choosing. Your journey to the water is different, but you end up sinking into the water, and Bearchild's decision once they're in the water was emblematic of a emotional depth that I don't think a lot of people ascribe to children in fiction usually.
Yeah. Yeah, because this is all like, okay, he either, goes to do his own thing, uh, he either tries to do something risky so he would fit in, or, like, as it says, like, it doesn't say swim with the others, it just says try to swim with the others, because I'm guessing, again, that's, like, hard for him. So let's accept it there.
You accept Dexter's challenge and prepare to launch yourself off the waterfall. No one attempts to stop you. Go underwater. You stay there. No one notices. There is you jumped, or whatever way you ended up going, you fell into the water, and you ended up sort of staying at the bottom and looking up and realizing nobody cared and deciding to stay there, and you end up blacking out and reviving on the shore, and everyone left you. These children are terrible.
Yeah, children are actually horrible.
I like a story that shows you that fact. Like if there is a game or a story in general that shows you children as these bright engines of light and happiness, then they're freaking liars.
Yeah, I remember when I played Fallout 2 and children pickpocketed my sniper rifle. So yeah, children are terrible.
3, that never happened. Like, you had some kids who would curse you out, but you never had, like, the kids straight up gank you in this post-apocalyptic wasteland, which, you kind of miss. It's the little things, the touches of home.
Bailey attempts to make a pun. Of course he does.
So Bailey's literally going through pun withdrawals, which I think is...
I like this. Stares at Carla in silent pain.
There's so much hot water, I remember didn't get the chance to say it. Because that's a pun. I know, but it's not the same. The one I had was so good.
I like worst. I like the worst being a larger size.
And bolded. Carla glances in Jonathan's direction. He's absorbed in his work. She sighs. This once I will tolerate a pun willingly. Hit me. Bailey, this is sure raining on our parade.
Wow. That was like a double pun.
Pretty terrible. Bailey smiles.
APA regulations in chat asks, is there such a thing as a good pun? What's your attitude towards that?
Good pun is a bad pun.
Yeah.
If a pun does not make you groan or otherwise hate the person, just hate existence in general, then it's not a good pun.
Yeah, I'd say that's where I stand as well. There are no good puns. There are though high effort and low effort puns. That is the thing.
You know, the perfect thing is mixing a low effort one with a high effort one, just to show how painfully you can twist the English language. It's been hours and it's raining. It's been hours and it's raining. It's getting dark. If this was a Persona game, what you just did with Bailey would have strengthened your social link.
Perda is going to. I also love this though. Like this is such very childlike thinking. Like you almost died. You don't know where you are. It's dark. It's raining. You might die, and your first thought is, "Oh, my parents are gonna kill me."
Yeah.
Because somehow a kid doesn't understand the gravity of the situation, and the worst possible thing for a kid is what like their parents will do to them. So I do think that's like a perfect response to it.
You can't see my face right now, but if you could, like, I'm freaking beaming over here. It is so awesome to hear verbally and just otherwise that someone likes your work or that you did something good. Someone somewhere thinks you did something good. One of the best experiences I had was shortly after the release of Bear Dad and immediately after the release of Mazurka Ghost in Italy, which was my third Twine game, spiked 5 minutes. And Adventure X 2016. And at Wordplay London was a bunch of people from the interactive fiction community. This was like just after the end of voting for the interactive fiction competition, so the winners had just been chosen. Bear Dad didn't even make it into the top. Some pretty cool press reception. And when I got there, I started talking to people around the room, and these were amazing people, really fun, awesome, creative people who had been made these super impressive things inside and outside of interactive fiction competition. The dude who made Birdland, for example, which is a super notable Twine game, of like the best designs and stories made within the engine. And I happened to say the word Bear Dad, and like all of the heads around me snapped. And it was like, "You're the guy who made Bear Dad? Oh my gosh, I love Bear Dad!" And just seeing that all the people in this small group in this one room, that they had not only played it, but they didn't hate me for it. It was a fantastic feeling, and I don't think there's anything quite like making something creative and then seeing people react to it, whether it's good or bad.
Yeah,
The fact that anyone dedicated time to what you did is amazing.
yeah.
And on that note, I'm super sorry. I was just gonna say I'm super glad to see you publish your first RPG Maker game, because I know you're a game designer and stuff, but doing that solo stuff, I'm so proud of you. You're doing cool things.
Yeah, I've actually had a lot of trouble finding a tool that meshes with me because I've tried all those, quote unquote easy tools. So, RPG Maker, like, I just tried to go and finish one thing, like, even if it's simple. And I was just like, yeah, like, this feels good and I feel I can do more stuff with this. So, it was definitely kind of like an icebreaker for me. But yeah,
That's what game development's all about, finding what fits you.
Yeah. Anyway, I think this was my most memorable scene in the entire game, when you find, Bear Dad, who has been obviously searching for you this entire time because, you're his kid and you were gone.
4 cell phones, and
Yeah.
you say "Dad" in the most silent voice. This is really the climax of, despite the big scene in the third act and everything, this is the real emotional climax of Bear Dad. And it was the hardest to write, and I think it was the most rewarding section as far as this determines whether or not someone's going to get to the end or not.
Yeah.
And most people who got to this section, thankfully, decided to stick with it to the end, and I'm so happy about that. A single vein pulses along his snout. If you've ever seen somebody really angry, you'll see like a vein pulsing on their head or on their neck or something, and it's the most terrifying thing ever because they can have a stone face, and that one vein will tell you that they're pissed.
These are all both also good choices because like a children's like I guess like in this situation your logic would be, okay, if I back away, if he catches up to me, it's gonna be worse. But if I stay still, he's gonna get to me, and it's gonna be really bad. So like both are reactions that I think a kid in this situation would consider. Like a kid that was in this situation, yeah.
All the choices you make here, the dialogue reacts to it.
Yeah.
Dad, you shout. He doesn't answer. And you run. You run out of there. Stopping the pacing of that thing deliberately, forcing you to go back here and confront all the different sides of the issue, and further heightening the drama of the moment because it's like, you stopped it at the best part. What's happening? What's going to happen next?
Yeah. It's worth seeing it in like an interactive fiction because it has its own pacing. I feel like in books, when I like write in like written fiction form, I also like to jump around a lot, but it's also very risky to do it in that format because even though this is all written, it's just like a completely different pace. And I actually
in a regular book?
Yeah, in a regular book, because one thing I did do, I like in an early draft of something I did, there was a lot of bouncing around, and the reaction was, oh, okay, this feels like it would work for something that's in motion, but it doesn't work for a book. So then I put that entire thing that was broken up into one section, and then all of a sudden it did work. But then like here, because this is kind of going at like an interactive pace, I feel like here it does build up excitement because it's still more visual than an actual classic book. It's more like it's more like when you have the visual feedback from like movie or a TV show or a video game.
Yeah, that's the thing. Actually, I'm working through for my novel now. I love. We've gone through this. I love contrasting, bouncing between them to give further context to whatever you're seeing at any one time. I'm not doing the footnotes thing, but I'm doing something a little bit different that gets across the similar messages. And because books are such a stolid medium, they've been going for thousands of years, they're going to keep going. The ways people are willing to experience them seem very limited. Somebody changing the entire way they are willing to confront a book for your work alone it at least feels like that would be fairly rare and extremely terrifying. So a lot of my current creative worries are, oh my gosh, is this thing I'm doing and putting so much work into, is it going to pay off, or is it the wrong thing for the wrong medium?
Yeah.
You slip on a wet rock, nothing changes. Bear Dad isn't going faster. Bear Dad isn't going slower. He just keeps coming. The vein keeps pulsing. I wanted to invoke. I've actually never seen something like Friday the 13th or something, but I wanted to invoke that whole image of this monster like Jason or Freddy, actually Jason more, like just lumbering towards you, and you can't do anything. So you strike out, crawl away, or freeze.
Strike out. Oh, it just like switches you back.
and are moving a large piece of furniture into place while Bailey keeps watch. So, just to be clear, we are not trying to kill the bear. No! If this works, we'll either trap it in the room or be separated from it by 2 plates of 4-inch thick metal. The tricky bit is that we have to know where the bear is and deal with it in some way before we can move on. Is it possible that the bear isn't actually hunting us or something? Carla drops the desk she was carrying with Jonathan smashing his foot.
Swear words.
That was originally an actual swear word instead of some asterisks and stuff, but it felt out of place to see Jonathan curse. He's such a lovely soul. And then he quotes what he just said. I'm sorry, but that hurt, Carla. Bailey, what did you just say? I went over these sections so often, getting their voices down so that their dialogue felt and for the setting and for all these other different considerations that go into good dialogue. So, if anything, any section that has dialogue in it, it takes easily an hour. Are you seriously telling me that I'm the only one who considered that the bear might not be actively trying to kill us? You swipe at Bear Dad with your little bitty bear child hands.
It doesn't work.
Bear Dad picks you up by the scruff of your neck and straightens, bringing you to eye level. His voice is slow and calm, even as the vein in his snap pulses faster.
Here it comes.
You want to tell me where you went? And it's quiet, because something being quiet somehow ends up being more terrifying than something that's loud and in your face, which is what Bear Dad originally was. And this is where we get the title thing. Screw you, Bear Dad! As you speak them, you just insulted them. Bear Dad's eyes grow hard and cold. He pulls you into a tight, furry hug. And that is not what you expected then. And you're saying sorry.
Yeah, I think on that note, it might be good to wrap this up. And leave people hanging as to what actually happens in the end. Maybe you can play it yourself and find out. Because this game, I believe you can play for free in a browser, right?
Yep, xolivermakeswords.itch.io, complete with a new save function.
Cool. I will put the link in the description of the YouTube video. Nelson, anything you want to add before we close this off? Anything you want to plug? How people can contact you? Send you punt suggestions?
The best way to contact me and follow my future work is at @RitNelson on Twitter. I write about religion at videogamesthebible.com. But if you just want to support my work or whatever, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/ZoliverMakesWords. ZoliverMakesWords.itch.io is my freaking game branding. If you want to find my stuff there, I just released an accessible, expandable tabletop RPG framework called Ellipses, which is, again, donationware. Base rule set is free. I want to make it as accessible as possible. Basically, there's a lot of ways to get the stuff I make for free, but if you want to support me, there's Patreon, there's PayPal, there's straight up buying my stuff, or there's hiring me. I do freelance work, so if you like what you saw of Bear Dad and you want some nuanced story stuff for your story, feel free to hit me up again at @RitNelson on Twitter, or via email at ritnelson@gmail.com. I keep my branding consistent, and I do just want to thank you so much for giving me the chance not only to plug my stuff at the end, but to talk about this and talk about narrative. I had a blast, and I'm so happy to see that you enjoyed the game.
Thank you too for guesting on this little stream / YouTube video, and this was really fun. It's really nice to talk about interactive fiction. I don't get the opportunity to do that often. It's also always nice to see, what people thought when they were creating anything like this.
Oh, definitely.
So that's it for the video and for the stream. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on the next stream.
Take care, everyone.